1,000 Lives of Wisdom, The Journey of a Timeless Guru by David Russo. Chapter 1, The Awakening. The mountain air tasted like stillness. The village of Dwarka was little more than a breath clinging to the edge of the Himalayas. A few homes, a temple, and the old stone hut where Guru Aryan sat each morning before the sun crested the white horizon. No one really knew how old the guru was. Some claimed he had not aged in decades. Others swore they'd seen him as a young man in yellow robes, meditating beneath the same cedar tree where he now sat as a silver-haired sage. Whatever the truth, he had long since become a living myth. Ravi wasn't from this village. He was a city boy, a philosophy student from Delhi, with too many questions and not enough answers. He had come here chasing a rumor, an instinct, and perhaps a desperation he wasn't yet ready to admit. Now, wrapped in a wool shawl and morning chill, he sat cross-legged before the silent guru, watching his breath cloud in the crisp air. Aryan hadn't spoken in over an hour. Not a word, not a blink. Finally, Ravi whispered, "What is wisdom?" The question hung in the cold air between them like incense smoke, not demanding, just lingering. The old man opened his eyes slowly, deep brown, almost black, but vast, as though behind them stretched a night sky full of forgotten stars. "You ask what cannot be told," Aryan said softly. "Yet you are right to ask. I've read books, studied teachings, debated professors, but none of it feels real." "It's all words," Ravi said, his voice cracking with the weight of his own confusion. "I don't want knowledge. I want to understand." Aryan studied him for a moment, not like a teacher looking at a student, but like a flame looking at a shadow. "You will not find wisdom in words," the guru said, "but perhaps in stories." He turned toward the east. The sun had begun to crest the mountains, spilling gold across the snow like honey over a glass. "I have lived 1,000 lives," he said, almost to himself, "and in each I gathered fragments. Some were born in light, others in darkness. All of them are me. All of them are you." Ravi tilted his head, unsure. "You mean metaphorically?" "No," Aryan replied, closing his eyes again, "not metaphorically." There was silence again, but not empty, pregnant with something waiting to be born. Then Aryan spoke, his voice slipping into a rhythm like water over stone. "Once I was a man of fire, steel in hand, blood on sand, a warrior feared and praised. My name echoed across deserts. Yet I could not hold the hand of the one I loved. Pride made me a god. But gods are lonely. Another time I was born in chains, a slave beneath the same sun I once conquered. I carried stones in silence, obeyed every order. I learned to bow, not to men, but to suffering. I saw the strength in gentleness, the rebellion in kindness. I have taught lies as truth. I have healed with hands that once destroyed. I have spoken too much and lived in silence. I have kissed lips I would never see again. I have burned cities and wept for sparrows. In every life, I reached for the same thing. Sometimes I called it victory, other times love, knowledge, justice, peace. But always it was the same, a longing to return." He opened his eyes again and looked directly into Ravi's. "Wisdom," he said, "is the memory of who you've always been, when you finally stop pretending to be someone else." Ravi sat frozen. It wasn't the words, it was the feeling behind them, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. He swallowed. "Are these stories true?" "They are real," Aryan said, "and now they are yours to remember." Ravi felt something shift inside, not an answer, but an opening. That night, Ravi sat alone in the small room the villagers had given him. The mountains loomed outside, ancient and unmoved. But within him, something stirred. A feeling like deja vu, or maybe destiny. He wasn't sure what he'd found here, but he knew he couldn't return the same. Not yet. Chapter 2. Fire in Chains. The wind shifted high on the mountain ridge, brushing past with the scent of cedar and distant ash. Ravi sat across from Guru Aryan once more. This time, he didn't fidget. His body was still, his attention clear. Dawn's golden light crept across the old man's weathered face, revealing lines not just of age, but of silence kept and lives remembered. Aryan had not spoken since the evening prior. Yet Ravi sensed that words were no longer the point. Something deeper was preparing to rise. Then, without turning his head, the Guru's voice broke the stillness. "You wanted to know," he said, soft but steady. "Then listen, not with your mind, but with whatever inside you has no name." Ravi gave a silent nod. This time, he didn't come with questions, only presence. "There was a life," Aryan began, eyes drifting past Ravi into some far place the present could not reach, "where I was born into steel and sand. They named me Veer. I lived by the sword, and they called me a hero. My hands were swift, my victories many. I wore honors like armor, and carried blades like extensions of will. I believed myself righteous, respected, feared." He paused, voice dropping low. "But beneath it all, I was chasing immortality, not in spirit, but in name. I wanted to be remembered, even if it meant being alone." Aryan looked down at his own open palms. "I came home once, victorious from battle. The city cheered, but the one I loved had gone. Her heart broken, her voice unheard. She had pleaded with me to stay, to choose peace over pride. I chose the war. No battlefield wound ever cut so deep. She died while I was away, and I returned to an empty house. I held my sword that night and wept like the boy I once was. No battlefield wound ever cut so deep." Ravi was quiet, then asked gently, "Did you regret the war?" Aryan's eyes met his. "No, I regretted forgetting the heart that tried to save me from it. Pride walks in armor, but love walks barefoot." He closed his eyes for a beat. "Centuries later, I returned. Not in glory, but in chains." Ravi's brow furrowed. "A slave?" Aryan nodded. "Born with no name of my own, branded, beaten, silenced, forced to serve men who believed pain was order. I tasted cruelty, not as an enemy, but as a meal. But in that broken life, I found something the warrior never had, the strength to endure, and the courage to stay kind." He smiled faintly, as if remembering something warm amid the darkness. "There was a young boy, crippled at birth, slower than the rest. He was often punished for falling behind. One day I stepped between him and the whip, took the strikes myself. That night he held my hand and whispered, 'You're stronger than fire.'" Aryan looked out into the trees. "In the field of pain, compassion became my weapon, quiet but unshakable." Ravi sat with the weight of both lives. "Which of them mattered more?" he asked softly. Aryan exhaled slowly. "Both mattered. One taught me the illusion of greatness, the other the truth of humility. Without either, I would still be asleep." Ravi nodded, his voice low. "So pain isn't just punishment?" "No," the Guru said. "Pain is the mirror. It reflects what pride tries to ignore. It strips away the mask and shows you what remains. Power without compassion is brittle, and suffering, if it leads nowhere, is just noise. But if you let it, it carves a path." A sudden gust moved through the trees, not loud but deep. It stirred the air between them like a turning page. Then Aryan asked, "Have you ever felt like a warrior, Ravi?" Ravi blinked. "No, I've never fought anything." Aryan tilted his head. "Perhaps not in this life, but the fire in your chest, the need to prove something, It remembers. Ravi looked away, unsettled by the truth of it. Arian closed his eyes. Let the echoes speak, not to trap you in the past, but to free you from repeating it. No more words followed, only silence, but it was no longer empty. Ravi didn't try to fill it. He simply sat, listening, not with his ears, but with the quiet thing inside him that had begun, slowly, to awaken. And somewhere within him, a voice he didn't yet recognize whispered, "You have lived before, and now it is your turn to remember." Chapter 3, Mind and Heart. By the third morning, Ravi had stopped checking the time. There was something timeless about the rhythm of the mountain, the slow melt of snow, the silent drift of clouds, the way Guru Arian breathed as if he were part of the earth itself. They sat again beneath the cedar tree. Birds chirped in the branches above as if eavesdropping. Ravi finally broke the silence. "So you've been a warrior and a slave." Arian gave a small nod. "What came after?" The Guru's eyes shimmered with memory. After fire and chains came thought. "In one life I was a scholar," Arian said, voice quiet but firm, born into a golden age. Libraries, debates, manuscripts copied by candlelight. I devoured knowledge like a starving man. Philosophy, logic, language, astronomy. I could quote 100 sages by the time I was 20. He smiled, but there was no pride in it. People traveled far to hear me speak. I was praised for my mind, sharp, quick, disciplined. But inside, a pause. Inside, I was empty. Ravi frowned. "Empty? But you were brilliant." "Brilliance is not the same as wisdom," Arian said. I could argue about the soul for hours, but I didn't know how to sit with someone in pain. I treated life like a problem to be solved. Even love. I dissected it rather than felt it. Ravi leaned forward. "What changed?" Arian's eyes grew distant. "She died." Ravi blinked. "A woman I loved," Arian said, gentle, full of music and tears. She had no interest in philosophy, said it made her head ache. But she loved me anyway. She fell ill. I studied everything I could, herbal scrolls, ancient remedies, even foreign medicine. But nothing worked. I sat by her bedside quoting theories of death. She just smiled weakly and said, "Can you stop thinking and just hold me?" His voice broke slightly on the last line. She died in my arms, not needing answers, just presence. And I realized all my learning hadn't taught me how to be human. Ravi felt his throat tighten. The wind stirred again, but the silence between them held more weight than before. "What happened after?" Ravi asked softly. Arian took a slow breath. "In another life, I was born as a healer. No titles, no temples, just a small hut in the hills. People came with wounds, fevers, grief. I didn't explain life to them. I touched it. Held crying children, sat with dying elders, mixed herbs with quiet prayers. I didn't need to speak much. There was no applause, no philosophy, but I slept better in that hut than I ever did in all my scholars' chambers." He turned to Ravi now, because this time I wasn't trying to understand life, I was trying to serve it. Ravi stared at him. "So is knowledge bad?" Arian smiled. "No, but it's incomplete." He tapped his chest with 2 fingers. "The mind can open doors, but the heart tells you which ones to walk through." Ravi let that sink in. So much of his life had been spent chasing the next insight, the next idea. But maybe he'd been missing something quieter, something simpler. Arian continued, "There are people who feel deeply, but don't know how to name it. And there are those who name everything, but have forgotten how to feel." "And you?" Ravi asked. "I have been both," Arian said. "And now I try to be neither. I try to be whole." Ravi felt something warm inside his chest. Not a solution, not even clarity, but something softer, realer. He sat back and whispered, "Tell me more." Arian smiled as the wind rustled the branches above. "Then let us continue," he said. Chapter 4, The False Prophet. The clouds gathered early that day. By afternoon, the sky was pale gray, and the wind that usually danced through the cedars had quieted, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Ravi sensed a change in Arian too. The guru was more still than usual, eyes half shuttered, jaws slightly tense. They sat beside the stone path, watching clouds drift through the valley below like ghosts. Arian spoke first. Not all my lives were noble. Ravi looked over. He hadn't asked a question this time. I assumed, Ravi said gently, trying to lighten the moment, that one of them had to involve crime or scandal. Arian didn't smile. No, he said. Worse, I pretended to be what I had not yet become. In one life, Arian said, voice quieter than usual, I wore robes, not unlike these, sat on a raised platform, spoke in soft tones. People called me master. They brought gifts, bowed at my feet, hung on every word I said. Ravi straightened slightly. He hadn't expected this. But it was all a lie, Arian said. I had no true insight. I had read the scriptures, yes, and memorized teachings. I knew how to look wise. I knew how to pause before answering, how to phrase things in riddles. I could mimic depth. He looked down at his hands, fingers curling in shame. I was hungry, not for truth, but for worship. At first, I convinced myself I was helping people, that I was giving them hope, but I wasn't. I was feeding on their faith. Every time someone bowed to me, I felt larger. Every time they cried at my words, I felt powerful, but inside, I was hollow. Ravi didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. Finally, he asked, what broke the illusion? Arian's voice dropped. A young man came to me, poor, honest, eyes like yours. He had lost everything, his family, his land. He came not for comfort, but for clarity. He wanted truth, no matter how hard it was. And I? Arian looked away. I gave him performance, empty metaphors, told him to surrender his pain, to donate what little he had for his karmic purification. He obeyed. He trusted me. Then he took his own life a week later. Ravi inhaled sharply. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Arian nodded. So was I, but sorrow doesn't erase consequence. Ravi was quiet for a long time. Then, did anyone ever find out? Arian gave a bitter smile. No, my name remained revered long after that life ended. They built a statue in my honor. He looked up at the gray sky. But I knew, and karma doesn't forget just because the world does. After a moment, he added, in the next life I was born into silence, mute from birth. I couldn't speak a word until I was nearly 20. Ravi blinked. You think that was punishment? No, Arian said. It was a blessing. He folded his hands. I had used words like weapons, so I was born without them. And in that silence, I began to hear what truth really sounds like. The wind picked up slightly. A single raven flew overhead, calling as it passed. Ravi looked at Arian, unsure of what to do with the ache he felt, not for the guru, but for himself. I think I've done that, Ravi said softly. Not like that, but I've acted wiser than I was, quoted things I didn't really live, tried to sound spiritual when I was still full of fear. Arian turned to him, eyes filled with gentle understanding. We all pretend, he said, till the pain of pretending becomes heavier than the courage to be real. Ravi looked down, his voice barely a whisper. What happened to the people you hurt? Arian closed his eyes. Some are still wandering, some are here now. Ravi's head snapped up. The guru didn't explain. He simply placed a hand over his heart and said, May truth find them and find me. That night, Ravi sat awake for hours, staring at the stars through the window. He had come here seeking light, but sometimes he realized wisdom begins in the shadows. Chapter 5, The Silent Path. The next morning, Ravi arrived earlier than usual. The wind was soft, the trees still. Guru Arian was already seated beneath the old cedar, his shawl wrapped tight against the mountain chill. He hadn't spoken since the day before. This time, Ravi didn't rush to fill the quiet. He simply sat. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt alive, like something sacred lived in the stillness between breaths. After a while, Arian's voice emerged from the hush like a ripple on still water. "You learn much when you speak," he said, "but far more when you stop." Ravi nodded slowly, not wanting to break whatever spell the air held. "I once lived a whole life in silence," Arian said. "I was born into a monastery tucked between snow and sky. From the age of 7, I took a vow not of words, but of listening. 10 years passed before I spoke a full sentence." Ravi raised an eyebrow. "By choice?" Arian smiled faintly. "By need. I had spoken so many false things in lives before. Words to impress, to manipulate, to defend. That silence became the one way to hear the truth again." Ravi leaned back against a tree trunk. "Wasn't it lonely?" "Not at first," Arian said. "At first it was terrifying." He looked out over the valley. "In silence, all your masks fall away. You cannot explain yourself, cannot defend, cannot charm. All the things we use to construct identity, they dissolve. I faced parts of myself I didn't know were there, shadows that had been waiting beneath my voice." Ravi whispered, "What did you find?" Arian was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "Noise, so much noise. Regret, shame, old battles, old hungers, thoughts like storms. But when I stayed with it, without distraction, without trying to escape, the storms began to settle, like mud sinking in still water. And beneath it all was something I hadn't felt in lifetimes." "What?" Ravi asked. "Peace." They sat in silence again, this time not as strangers, or teacher and student, but as two people sharing stillness. Arian continued, "One morning, I watched a single snowflake fall onto a branch. I had seen snow thousands of times before, in many lives, but in that moment, it was the most miraculous thing I had ever witnessed, because for the first time, I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't trying to become someone. I was simply here." Ravi looked down. "I don't think I've ever really been here," he said. Arian looked at him gently. "Most people live as echoes of themselves, their minds 5 steps ahead or 10 years behind." Ravi sighed. "How did you know when to speak again?" The guru smiled just barely. "One morning a monk was weeping outside the temple. His sister had died. Everyone else avoided him, not out of cruelty, but awkwardness. No one knew what to say. So I walked to him. I sat beside him, and after a while, I reached out and touched his hand. He looked at me. Then I said only 4 words. Ravi waited. 'You don't weep alone.'" Arian's eyes shimmered. It was the first time I had spoken in over a decade, but those words came from stillness, not from my mind, from presence, and that made all the difference. The sky began to shift, the light softening toward dusk. Ravi asked, "So do you think everyone should be silent?" "No," Arian said, "only that they should learn to hear before they speak." He closed his eyes. "The world doesn't need more voices shouting into the wind. It needs people who know how to listen, deeply, patiently, without needing to be right." Ravi didn't answer. He just sat there, letting the quiet move through him. For the first time in his life, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like truth. Chapter 6. The Heart's Lesson. That evening, the clouds blushed pink as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. A hush had settled over the mountain, but it wasn't the cold kind. It felt warm, like the pause between heartbeats. Ravi and Arian sat beside the flickering lantern, the light dancing in their eyes. Ravi noticed the stillness in the guru's face tonight was different, softer, almost fragile. Arian looked out in the distance, as if the horizon had turned into memory. "I once believed enlightenment was a mountain peak," he said, "something to be climbed, something far from the chaos of human longing. He turned to Ravi, but in one life I discovered that love can open a deeper truth than any silence ever did. I was born a poet, Ariane said quietly, in a coastal village where the sea sang in every window and children grew up barefoot and wild. I spent my days writing verses and humming songs to the wind. People said I had an old soul, that I carried sorrow in my smile, but I was happy, free. Ravi listened without speaking. Then she arrived, Ariane said, a traveler's daughter. She was fire and rain and music I never heard before. Her laughter lit up the market square. Her anger was beautiful, sharp like broken glass and just as honest. Ravi raised an eyebrow. You were in love? I was undone, Ariane said with a rare smile. We would walk under the moonlight, trading poems and secrets. She believed in things I had forgotten, miracles, second chances, dancing barefoot in the rain. I thought I was wise until I met her. Then I realized I was only safe. Ariane's eyes gleamed in the lantern's glow. One night, she said to me, You don't have to understand everything, just feel it. I laughed, but later, those words cracked something open inside me. Love didn't make me wiser, it made me real, messy, afraid, exposed, and for the first time, alive. Ravi asked almost cautiously, Did it last? Ariane shook his head. No, she was never meant to stay. Her family moved again. Letters stopped. Time passed. I never saw her again. Ravi looked down. That must have broken you. Ariane replied, It did. A long pause. But sometimes the soul needs to break open, like a seed under the soil. Ravi glanced up. Did you love anyone after her? I tried, Ariane said, but no love is ever the same. Some are mirrors, some are storms, some are teachers. She was all three. And even her absence taught me something. What? Ariane's voice softened. That nothing, not even love, belongs to us. Everything we touch is borrowed, and that's what makes it beautiful. The wind stirred the trees as Ravi sat back, the weight of the story pressing gently on his chest. I've only been in love once, he said, surprising himself. She left me, Ravi continued. Said I was too distant, too in my head. He smiled bitterly. She said I listened to her words, but never to her silence. Ariane looked at him knowingly. She wanted to be felt, not just understood, he said. Ravi nodded slowly. Do you still miss her? Ravi asked. Ariane looked up at the stars. I don't miss her, he said. I miss who I became in her presence. He placed a hand over his heart. Love carves space inside us. Even when it leaves, the shape remains. And sometimes in stillness, we find that what we loved never left. It just changed form. The lantern flickered. Neither man spoke for a while. And somewhere between silence and memory, Ravi felt something stir inside him. Not grief, not regret. Just a quiet, aching beauty. The kind only love could leave behind. Chapter 7. The Flame Within. By morning, the mountain air had shifted. Crisp, electric, charged with something unseen. Ravi noticed it at once. The trees stood taller, the silence deeper, like the hush before a storm. Guru Arian sat near the overlook, cross-legged and still, but his presence felt different. No longer soft, it burned. Without turning, he said, anger can be sacred, but if you don't master it, it will master you. Ravi sat beside him, careful. Today's story would not be gentle. In one life, Arian began. They named me Karen. I was born in the slums, where water was rationed, and silence often meant someone had died. I watched my mother beg for medicine. I watched the rich step over the poor like we were trash. Injustice wasn't a theory. It was breath, hunger, grief. His voice hardened. So I rose. I rallied others. We marched. We lit fires. We shouted not for votes, but for change by any means. Ravi asked, quietly, "Did it work?" Arian's mouth tightened. "At first I was seen as hope. I gave speeches that stirred thousands. We seized food from corrupt warehouses. I felt alive, powerful, righteous. But something inside me shifted. Thunderclouds gathered in the distance. I started to hate not just the oppressors, but anyone who didn't join us. I condemned the silent. I threatened the hesitant. I told myself it was for justice. But really, I loved being right. Justice became revenge. Truth became noise. And he paused, I became what I once vowed to fight." Ravi's voice barely rose above the wind. "What happened?" Arian looked down. "We bombed a convoy. Thought it carried a corrupt official. A beat of silence. It was a school bus." Ravi flinched. Arian's voice was steady now, cold with memory. "The fire I lit didn't choose its victims. It simply devoured." The wind picked up, whispering of coming rain. Ravi asked, "So should we never fight?" Arian turned to him. "Fight, but know your reason. Fight, but from stillness, not from scars. Let justice rise from clarity, not from wounds left untreated. Because if fire burns inside you unchecked, it will consume everything you touch." Ravi stared at his hands. "I felt that fire, that helpless fury, seeing suffering and feeling powerless." Arian nodded. "The fire isn't wrong, but it must be forged, not unleashed." He placed a hand over his heart. "Revolution begins here, not in the streets, in the self. Until peace lives within you, you will create war outside you." Thunder echoed faintly. The sky was darkening fast. Ravi asked, "Do you still carry guilt from that life?" Arian's eyes softened. "Yes, but it no longer leads me. It walks behind me, a reminder." He pressed his palm to the earth. "I buried my weapons with my own hands. No ritual, no ceremony, just silence and tears." A raindrop fell on Ravi's skin. He didn't wipe it away. "Is there such a thing as pure justice?" he asked. Arian replied, "Only when it is born of love, not fear." The rain came, soft, cleansing, steady. They didn't move, and for the first time, Ravi didn't resist the storm. It passed through him, and he let it. Chapter 8. The Seer. The morning came wrapped in silver mist. Even birds were quieter that day, as if nature itself respected what was unfolding. Ravi sat beside Guru Arian, wrapped in his shawl, the sky still dim with pre-dawn light. The Guru's posture was relaxed, not in the way of someone resting, but in the way of someone who had nothing left to resist. His eyes were open but unfocused, as if seeing something beyond the trees, beyond the world. Then quietly he spoke. "There comes a time," Arian said, "when the journey no longer moves outward, when the path disappears beneath your feet, and all that's left is vision." Ravi listened, already holding his breath. "In one life, I wandered as a mystic," Arian began. "No name, no robe, no teacher. I wasn't seeking answers anymore. I simply watched." Ravi frowned slightly. "Watched what?" Arian smiled faintly. "Everything. The wind through branches, a woman sweeping dust, a child laughing in the market. People thought I was mad, but I was just aware." He looked up at the sky. The mist was beginning to lift, revealing the sun's first light. "That life was unlike the others. I no longer tried to fix the world or save it. I saw that the world didn't need saving. I needed seeing. Deeply." Ravi tilted his head. "You mean like mindfulness?" Arian chuckled softly. "No, not a technique, not a practice, just presence. A surrender so complete that even awareness no longer had a center. I became like the sky. Everything moved through me, but I held nothing." He paused. "I sat by rivers and wept, not from sorrow, not because every leaf, every ripple was holy, Not special, just real. Ravi spoke slowly, cautiously. Were you enlightened? Arian didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, I stopped asking. Ravi blinked. That's how I knew something had shifted. The part of me that wanted a title or a finish line had gone silent. There was no more me to reach the goal. There was just this. He reached down and picked up a small stone, holding it in his palm. The stone is already complete, he said. It does not need to understand gravity to rest on the earth. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but eternal. Ravi broke it with a whisper. But don't we need goals? Don't we have to do something? Arian looked at him gently. Yes, till we don't. The seed must grow. The child must run. The fire must burn. But eventually, even the flame becomes ash. Even motion returns to stillness. I had lived 100 lives of doing. This life was about being. Ravi felt something shift in his chest. Not a revelation, not even understanding, just a loosening. He looked at the old man beside him. The lines in his face seemed deeper today, but softer too, like the bark of an ancient tree that had weathered every storm and no longer feared the sky. Ravi asked, Did people follow you in that life? No, Arian said simply. They passed me by. A few stopped, most didn't, but some looked into my eyes and remembered something they couldn't name. Ravi stared at the ground. How do I get there? He asked. Arian didn't answer. He just looked at Ravi, not with judgment, not with instruction, just saw him. And in that gaze, Ravi felt something he hadn't expected. Not direction, but stillness. Not a push forward, but an invitation inward. Far below, the first village bells rang through the valley, and above, the sun slipped through the last of the mist, casting golden light across the path. For the first time since his arrival, Ravi didn't feel like he needed to go anywhere. He was already here. Chapter 9. The Teacher. The sun sat low in the sky now, painting everything in gold. The days on the mountain had changed something in Ravi. He no longer fidgeted when Arian was silent. He no longer waited for answers like coins dropped in a bowl. Now, he listened with his whole being. Arian sat across from him as always, legs folded, hands resting lightly on his knees. His face was peaceful, not perfect, not glowing with some mystic energy, just quiet. Finally, Ravi spoke. You've told me about your lifetimes. So many roads, so many selves, warrior, slave, healer, liar, lover, mystic. He paused and asked gently, But what are you now? Arian smiled, not wide, but deep. I am what remains when all the roles fall away. Ravi tilted his head. And what's that? The old man tapped his chest. Presence. They sat with that for a while. Then Ravi asked, Why tell me all this? Arian didn't answer right away. Then slowly he said, Because it is time. Time for me to speak less, and for you to begin? Ravi blinked. Me? Begin what? Arian looked at him, not as a teacher looks at a student, but as a mirror looks at a reflection. Your path. Not mine, not any other's, yours. One life, just one, but filled with all the echoes of the 1,000 that came before you. Ravi stared into the trees, trying to understand what was stirring inside him. I'm not a guru, he said quietly. Arian smiled. Neither was I, until I was. You think I became who I am through clarity? No, it was confusion that shaped me. It was loss, shame, longing. You do not need to be perfect to begin. You only need to be present. Ravi's voice cracked. What if I fail? Arian looked at him kindly. Then fail, but do so fully awake. The world doesn't need another flawless sage. It needs someone who remembers what it means to stumble and still choose light. The sun was brushing the tops of the trees now. Shadows stretched long across the stones. Arian reached into his shawl and pulled out a small pendant. Simple, made of sandalwood, worn with time. He placed it in Ravi's palm. "This isn't a symbol of mastery," he said. "It's a reminder. You carry 1,000 lives inside you, but only one breath at a time." Ravi held it gently. "I don't know what to do." Arian smiled again. "Good. That means you're ready." They stood together now, side by side, watching the last of the sunlight sink into the trees. Ravi looked at the old man who had once been a warrior, a charlatan, a mystic, and now stood simply as a presence, open and still. "You were my teacher," Ravi said. Arian looked at him, eyes glowing with something more than light. "No," he said, "I was your reflection. The teacher is already within you." And just like that, the silence returned. But this time Ravi understood. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of echoes, choices, lives he hadn't lived, and one he had barely begun. Chapter 10. The light continues. The night came slowly. It didn't fall like a curtain. It settled, soft and tender, like a blanket being drawn over a child. The fire crackled between them, its warm glow brushing the stone walls of Arian's small hut. Ravi sat close, hands wrapped around a bowl of tea, though he hadn't touched it. The air inside the hut felt heavy, not with sadness, but with a kind of sacred stillness, as if time itself had paused to listen. Arian lay on his cot, propped up slightly. His breath was shallow but steady. His skin had grown pale, like candle wax, but his eyes, those eyes still shimmered like clear water under moonlight. Ravi broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're leaving." Arian nodded slowly. "This body, yes." Ravi swallowed with tightness in his throat. "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Arian smiled faintly. "There's nothing more to teach. The rest, you must discover by living." The fire popped softly. Outside, an owl called once and then went quiet. Ravi leaned forward. "I'm afraid," he admitted. Arian looked at him with something deeper than sympathy, something like recognition. "Good," he said. "The ego is brave, but the soul is honest. Let fear come, just don't let it lead." They sat in silence for a while. Ravi reached into his coat and pulled out the pennant Arian had given him the day before. He held it up. "What do I do with this?" Arian's voice was barely audible. "Wear it. Forget it. Bury it. It doesn't matter. What matters is what it awakens in you." Ravi looked down, voice trembling. "How will I know what to do without you here?" Arian let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "You think I've been guiding you?" He coughed, then added gently, "You've been guiding yourself this whole time. I was just the mirror." Ravi's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. For the first time he realized they weren't tears of grief, but of gratitude. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Arian's answer was neither yes nor no. "If you look with your heart, you'll find me everywhere. Not as a man, not as memory, but as the light behind your eyes." The fire dimmed, the old man's breath grew slower, and then stillness. Not a sudden stop, but a quiet exhale, as if he had simply stepped into the next room. Ravi sat beside the still form for a long time, watching the final ember glow, then fade. He didn't cry again, he didn't panic, he just sat, feeling something vast rise inside him. Not sorrow, but a kind of knowing. At dawn, he stepped outside. The valley was wrapped in golden mist. Birds were beginning to sing. Life had not paused. It had only shifted shape. Davy looked down the winding path he had once climbed with doubt and restlessness. Now he stood straighter. The pendant still hung around his neck, but he no longer clutched it. He didn't need to. The teacher was gone, but the teaching had taken root. Not in books, not in rituals, but in him. He took a breath, then took a step, not toward answers, but toward life. And with that, the light continued.